Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Velero community meeting. My name is Jonas Roslin. I'll be your host today, and we have a bunch of stuff that we want to cover. We want to make sure that we get time in for your questions as well. So please, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask away. Or if you would rather type them out in the chat, you can do that as well. If you want me to read them out afterwards, let me know if you can't speak up. All right, I'm going to share the agenda here so you all can see what we're going to be talking about today. Give me 1 second and sharing. All right, so the agenda for today for the community meeting, we're going to start off talking about the user survey. We have a webinar coming up. Then we got Steve he's going to do a demo of a new plugin. Going to do a little deep dive into a CSI support proposal with Nolan, and then a design proposal for running backup and restoring in its own worker pods. And then Kaliesha will be talking about adding the pod volume backup to object storage as well. So we'll start off with the Velero user survey. And this is something that we talked about in a previous community meeting as well. We will be doing a user survey. This is not just for Velero users, but rather anyone that is interested in backup and recovery or data migration or disaster recovery for Kubernetes environments. So it will be launching soon. Most likely it will launch on Thursday. So we'll make sure everyone knows about it on Thursday. And this coincides with the other thing we got going on Thursday, which is the Velero webinar. So the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, they host weekly webinars, and they have a bunch of really awesome projects, open source projects that they host essentially. So we have been accepted to host one such webinar, and that's going to be on Thursday. So on Thursday, please join us. We got Steve here and Tom who are going to be presenting. And if you have any questions after this meeting, if you want to ask Steve or Tom something during the webinar, please do so. Please sign up and join for the webinar on Thursday. Any questions regarding any of the surveys or the webinars? All right, then we'll move into the next item, which is Steve.
Cool, thanks, Jonas. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Stop then.
Sure, 1 sec. All right, is the size okay?
That looks good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so I wanted to run through a quick demo of a feature that we merged into master fairly recently, and this is something that we've been hearing a decent amount of demand for from users. So the feature is to basically add the ability in Velero to change the storage class of a persistent volume and persistent volume claim as you're restoring it into a cluster. And so there are kind of a couple of different use cases for this. One may be that you just want to change the storage class, so you want to switch to using a different storage class for your persistent volume. But it also comes up a lot in cross-cluster migrations and especially cross-provider migrations. So if you imagine you're, say, migrating a workload from an AWS cluster into a GKE cluster. In AWS, you may have a storage class called GP2. But in GKE, you're not going to have a storage class called that. There's no disk type in GKE called GP2. And so you probably need to update your storage class so that persistent volume is created correctly. So this feature allows you to do just that. So I'll kind of walk through what it looks like. So, the first thing I'll show you is just that in the Velero namespace, I'm currently running the master image of Velero. So this feature has been merged into master, but it hasn't yet been released in an official tagged release. So you can check it out using master if you want to, but we wouldn't recommend using this in a production cluster yet. So I'll show you the namespaces I have. So I have the standard Nginx example namespace set up. So that's the workload I'm going to be backing up and restoring here. And if we take a look at our persistent volumes in our storage classes, you can see I have one persistent volume here, and this is being used in that Nginx example. And currently, this is wrapping a little bit, but the storage class is managed premium. And then if you look down here at the set of storage classes that I have in the cluster, I have, in addition to a default, I have a managed premium storage class and then also a managed premium retained storage class. So what I'm going to end up doing is doing a backup and a restore of the Nginx namespace that switches the storage class from managed premium to managed premium retain. So the way that we implemented this is as an additional restore item action plugin. So it's an in-tree plugin that operates during restores. And you can see it using the new Velero plugin get command. So if you look right here at the list of restore item actions, this change storage class plugin is the new plugin that implements this logic. So first thing I'm going to do is just create a new backup of the Nginx namespace. So I'll just say demo and include the Nginx example namespace. So this will just back it up as is, and I have a volume snapshot location set up so that we're getting a snapshot of this persistent volume that's being done. Or that's being used. So, okay, so the backup's complete. So I'll just take a quick look at that. All right, so the phase is completed. That's good. And we have a snapshot of the persistent volume. So what I want to do now is basically restore it using the alternate storage class. So the first thing I'm going to do is just delete the Nginx example namespace so that I'm able to restore it. And I'm gonna let that run. And then the other thing I want to show is the way that this plugin is configured is through a config map in the Velero namespace. So I have this one config map here. Just take a look at the YAML for it. So we'll have this documented so that it's clear kind of how to set this up. But the most important part of it is that within the data for the config map, we just have a really simple mapping here. So you have a key from a key whose name is the current storage class that you want to remap during a restore. And then the value is the new storage class that you want to assign. So in this case, we're saying any persistent volume or persistent volume claim that's using the managed premium storage class should be restored using the managed premium retained storage class. So let's just check and make sure that the namespace has been deleted and the persistent volume has been deleted. So that's all good to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is just create a restore from my demo backup. And since the config map already exists, there's nothing more that I need to specify here. It'll be picked up as part of the restore. And then I'll just put a watch on persistent volume so we can see as the PV comes up. All right, so that new persistent volume has been created. And then if you look right here, you can see the storage class is now managed premium retain. You see as well that it's being claimed by that same PVC just as it was before. I'll also take a look at the EDC that's in that Nginx namespace. Actually, if you just look right there, you'll see the storage class for the PVC has also been updated. So this plugin updates both the persistent volume storage class as well as the PVC storage class. So that pretty much covers the feature. I mean, in this case, I was doing an in-cluster restore, and so we were restoring from a snapshot. A lot of times in the kind of cross-provider, cross-cluster scenario, you'd be using Restic to migrate your data because you need it in a provider-agnostic format. And so in that scenario, changing the storage class would actually end up dynamically provisioning a new volume of that new storage class on your target cluster, and then the Restic data would be restored into it. So yeah, so that pretty much covers it. We hope this feature helps out with some of these migration scenarios that folks have been having to do some hacky things in terms of creating, storage classes with funny names to be able to get their migrations to work. So definitely keep an eye out for this. It'll be in the 1.1 release, which will be coming up before too long. And if you want to get an early preview on it, you can check out that master tagged Docker image in your non-production environments. Any questions on that?
Actually, I had a quick question about that. Doing some of our migration scenarios, we're actually in the process of doing something similar, but our code is kind of letting users choose, on a per PVC basis, if they want a different storage class in the new cluster. And again, similar use case of, you're going to a new version, might not have the same storage classes. You might be wanting to go from Gluster to Ceph or something like that. How is this plugin different than in the Restic case, which is what we're using, just changing the, we have a PVC plugin which just changes the storage class name based on an annotation?
Yeah, I think probably your code and our code look pretty similar. I mean, that's, we have a restore item action that's changing the storage class name for the PVC.
Got it. Okay. So it's the same basic idea. I guess the big difference is in your case, you're also, if you're restoring the PV as well, you're doing both. So I guess that's one difference. But okay, it sounds pretty similar then. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. If you were using Restic, you'd typically just be restoring the PVC, and the PV would be getting dynamically provisioned. But if you're restoring snapshots, you're also restoring the PV itself. So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. All right. Well, hand it back to Jonas.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Any other questions for Steve? All right. So next up, we have Nolan going to talk about the CSI support proposal.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share that. I'm not going to go too deep into this because it may take a while. Hopefully everybody can see my screen, and we'll bump the 2-inch. How's that for readability?
A little bigger. More? Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So the background here is if you've been listening to past community meetings in the last few months, we've been trying to investigate supporting CSI volumes and the currently alpha CSI snapshot API that has been going on in SIG storage and the CSI working group. This proposal is a new format that we're using for design proposals. Anybody can make these, but this proposal is coming out of some of the work I did on doing a prototype plugin for supporting CSI snapshots. So we have here kind of the high-level design and also a detailed design on what the plugins are actually going to do. These plugins are currently slotted to be included in tree. The original idea was to maybe have these out of tree for Velero, but we're going to have to make some core Velero changes in order to support getting details of like what CSI snapshot resources are included in a backup and things like that. So I don't want to go into a ton of detail here and take up a ton of time, but I just wanted to show this off and let people know that it is up there public. Please go take a look, comment on it. Yeah, that's mainly what I wanted to share. Does anyone have any questions?
I just shared the GitHub link as well, the link to the pull request there. So yeah, please comment if you have any comments there. That would be really, really appreciated. Thank you so much, Nolan.
Yep, thank you.
All right, moving on to Steve again. Design proposal for running each backup and restoring its own worker pod.
Yeah, so I can share my screen again. pull this up. Too many windows open. All right, let's see. Yeah, so I put up a draft design document for a kind of an architectural change to how Velero runs backups and restores. So currently, as most of you probably know, Velero is deployed as a deployment to your cluster with a single pod replica. And that pod runs all of the Velero controllers that are watching for Velero custom resources and acting on them. And so what that means is that all of the backups and restores that Velero is running run within that single pod in the deployment. And as we looked at this, we've recognized that there are some kind of performance and scalability issues related to this. Essentially right now, Velero is only capable of running a single backup at a time or a single restore at a time. And so we wanted to kind of improve the both the concurrency, so being able to run multiple backups and restores at a time, and also the scalability, so that you know, Velero should be able to easily scale based on your needs and your cluster size. And so I put up this draft document that proposes an approach where, rather than running backups and restores within the main kind of Velero server that's running the controllers, we would change Velero so that it actually spawns a new pod for each backup and each restore. I'm referring to these as worker pods. But the idea is that, you know, the main Velero server would basically just be responsible for being informed of new backup or restore custom resources, and then spawning one of these worker pods to go actually execute the backup and the restore. There are definitely some nice benefits to this approach. It makes concurrency pretty trivial, so it makes it really easy to run multiple backups and restores at the same time. It also makes the scalability characteristics pretty good. You know, you're basically at this point just limited by the total amount of resources that you have in your cluster to run these worker pods, so you can kind of scale up as much as you need to. And then the other kind of nice benefit that you get is, since you have you know, a single pod running a backup or a restore, it makes it really easy to stream the logs kind of as the backup or the restore is being run. Essentially what you're doing is just running kube control logs with the -f flag on the pod that's responsible for running your backup or restore. And so this is something that we don't support today. You have to kind of wait until the backup or restore is finished before you can really see the logs. And so that's definitely a nice kind of secondary benefit of this approach. So anyway, so the design doc is up. We started to you know, have some feedback and discussion on it. It's absolutely a draft and a work in progress, and there are some alternate approaches discussed that I would really like to get as much input as possible on, you know, before we definitely choose one approach. So yeah, please check out this pull request. It's up there. It's open. Add comments wherever you have. We're definitely interested in gathering feedback on this. So any questions on that right now?
I have a few. So first off, this looks like it will be kind of solving several of the things that's been brought up in community meetings in the past 2 months, essentially. So first off, being able to handle concurrent backups. And then also, as you said, streaming logs. I believe that was brought up just two community meetings ago, that we really wanted that to be in here. So it's great to see this. My main question here would be, what is the main, if there are any, drawbacks of doing this? What's the main concern when moving to this model compared to staying where we are right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it does make the, you know, you're no longer in a world where you just have a single pod, you know, assuming you're not using Rustic, which is a pretty simple deployment model. And I would say particularly, in the development workflow, a lot of times Velero developers, rather than actually deploying the Velero server to a cluster to run it, will just run the process locally, pointed at the API server for the cluster they're using. And so that's a really easy development model to follow. With this change, though, you will have to have actual pods running in the cluster. So you could still run the main Velero server locally on your development environment, but it would actually be spawning pods in the cluster. And so that means you would need to have a Docker image built that could be used for those worker pods that would be able to be pulled into your cluster. So, it does potentially make that development scenario a little bit more complex. On the other hand, having the kind of the work process for processing a backup or restore as its own command essentially means that you could run that command directly on your development environment as kind of an integration test if you're making any changes to it. So there are some kind of alternate ways that you could approach that. So that's definitely one that we've looked at. Beyond that, nothing else major springs to mind. Nolan or Adnan or Kaliesha, was there anything else that had come up so far?
I had a question on there that I don't think you've gotten to yet, but in terms of streaming logs, there is still a disconnect there in that Rustic is going to be performed by daemon set pods. And I think I had asked on the proposal if you'd given any thought to moving that Rustic logic into the worker pods so that those get scheduled on the node that they need to be on, and they do all the Rustic logic and all the Kube API logic. I don't know if you looked at that or if that maybe is too big of a change all at once.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that, so I haven't really thought about it. That could be tricky though, because you may have, in a single Velero backup, you may be using Rustic to back up volumes for pods that are on multiple nodes. And so unless you end up having kind of multiple workers, one per relevant node, that may be tricky. So yeah, I'll have to look at that some more, but
sure,
it could be complicated.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions on this design doc here? So, Steve, what do you see the timeline for this to be? If it were to be something that you MTS say, yeah, we want to work on this, what would be the time frame, you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's still up in the air a little bit. I mean, I wanted to get the draft design doc out because it's something I've been thinking about for a little while and that we've been talking about in the team for a little while. I wanted to get the design doc out well ahead of 1.2 planning so that if we wanted to execute on it for 1.2, we would feel like we were in a good state to be able to do that. But I think we still need to do some prioritization and decide if this is, one of the big features that we want to tackle in 1.2 as opposed to some other things. So I'd definitely like to, kind of get agreement on the approach so that whenever we do decide that this is a good thing to go after, that we're kind of ready to go. But I'm not yet committing to doing it for 1.2. I do think that it is a nice kind of foundational change that makes some other future things easier. And so there are kind of some dependencies there that would potentially make this a good candidate for the next release or maybe the release after.
Cool. That sounds like a sound strategy.
I have a quick question around the non-goals. Is the creating cron jobs for scheduled backups, is that just out of scope for now, or is that something that we don't want to do for some reason?
Yeah, this so creating cron jobs for scheduled backups. This was just, I don't know, something that had come up as we were talking about this idea of, using a pod per worker process. Was that, hey, we currently have our own essentially cron scheduler running within Velero. but we could use a similar approach where, when we get a schedule object or a schedule custom resource defined, Velero actually just creates a cron job to handle the cron scheduling for it. So I think it's kind of a related thing, but I don't think it needs to be tackled as part of the same effort. I think it's definitely still something we should consider. It would kind of simplify our schedule code, but I would probably just tackle it separately.
Sounds good. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve.
All right, thanks.
Let's move into the next one. That's Kaliesha talking about restic stuff.
Yes. So I guess I'm going to be working on restic related things, and right now I'm wrapping up the feature that adds the pod volume backup as a zipped file to the object storage, and so we can deal with it as objects when we try to do the syncing and restore. And let me see, I talked about this in a previous meetup recording. So the next thing, though, is we need to check for when restic has tail locks and undo them. So basically, I'm going to be doing some write-up for sort of a design document for that, and that's going to be the next thing I'll be working on if anybody's interested in giving feedback right on that issue right there. That's it.
Cool. Thank you. Any questions for Kaliesha? All right. Let's move to the next portion here, and I'll share my screen because it will make it easier for everyone to see. So what's coming up? Steve.
Yeah, so Scott, I know you had asked about this on Slack when we were planning to release 1.1. So, we've definitely been less date driven in general for our releases. So we've kind of identified a scope that looks to us like roughly, 2 to 3 months of work. And then typically we've just kind of released once we've gotten done with that set of work. So our current intent is to get 1.1 out somewhere around the end of summer. So, probably sometime in August. We do definitely have a decent number of PRs that have been merged since 1.0. And so, I don't want to wait too long to release 1.1. So if it's looking like the current scope of work would push us past August, I would say we'd probably look at just cutting some of that scope, pushing it into 1.2 and making sure that we get the 1.1 out in August. So no concrete date, but I would say definitely sometime in August.
Sounds good. Let's move to the contributor shoutouts. So, Steve.
Yeah, I can cover this. I just wanted to give some shout outs to some of the folks who have had PRs merged. I think these are all the ones since our last community meeting. So the first one, Tho Tishner, who added some better documentation that covered all the requirements for using Velero with the restic integration on OpenShift. Given that restic runs as a daemon process that needs a host path mount, there are some kind of special requirements there. So appreciate the improved documentation there for OpenShift users. We then had Pragio Parab, who started to add support into our kind of build and release process for power architecture. And so we now will be, when we ship releases, we will be publishing the Velero binary built for this architecture on GitHub. And then we also have support for building Docker images for this architecture. We don't yet have the code for actually publishing those as part of our standard releases. But the Docker file is there and the scripts are there so that users can build their own images if they need to for this architecture. And as far as I know, there will be an additional contribution to actually kind of enable this as part of our, basically build the images, build and publish the images going forward for our official releases. So appreciate that. That definitely helps out for a certain set of users of Velero. Then we had JW Matthews, who fixed a bug in the Velero version command. I believe the issue is that it wasn't respecting the namespace flag. So if you were running Velero in a non-standard namespace, this command didn't work. So we got a bug fix for that. So I appreciate that. And then last but not least, we had TL Camp, who submitted a PR, basically an enhancement to the Velero install command to be able to specify pod annotations that you want to apply to the Velero pods. And so this can be really useful if you're running on AWS, for example, and you're using Cube to IAM. You need to add some annotations to the pods, and there was previously no easy way to do that through the Velero install without actually editing the YAML. So this new flag allows you to do that and keeps the simplicity of the Velero install workflow while allowing you to integrate your Cube to IAM stuff with it. So yeah, we really appreciate that contribution, and then it's definitely something that several users were interested in. So thanks a lot to all the contributors. You know, every PR and every kind of input that we get just helps make the project better. So we really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Do we have any last questions from the people on the call here? All right. So as you all know, this community meeting is run on the first and third Tuesday of every month. So the division here between July and August means that it's actually going to be 3 weeks until the next community meeting. So the next community meeting will happen on August 6th. So we will see you all then. Have an awesome rest of the week, everyone. And yeah, have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.